So for those of you who live in the United States or haven't really been paying attention to kind of European weather patterns, Tropical Storm Eunice is what we would typically refer to as a hurricane. It came up from West Africa, as many hurricanes do. However, instead of kind of moving along the south and heading towards the United States, the Caribbean, like they usually do, this one kind of swung up with newly warm currents and came up and hit England. And that's shocking for a number of reasons, the largest of which is that hurricanes really don't hit England. England doesn't have hurricanes or tropical storms very rarely. Now, mind you, this is not the first time that a tropical storm has hit England. There have certainly been freak ones in the past, but this is actually the second one fairly recently in the last few years. So what we're starting to see here is a trend of tropical storms that are able to ride out warmer currents and head north. So usually what happens with a hurricane, and the reason that hurricanes kind of move the direction they move is because as the winds follow the ocean currents, it creates kind of this circular effect, right? So at the bottom near the equator, it's warmer and it comes up and it cools off, and then the storm kind of dissipates as the water gets cold, right? Up near the New England, northern Atlantic area. And then by that time, maybe you get some rain and a little bit of wind, but you're not getting like a tropical storm, right? You're not getting like that cyclonic, that circular cyclone spiral type projection on a map that is demonstrative of tropical storms, right? And the reason is supposed to be because the water is just not hot enough to support that kind of storm, right? Because you need a certain level of evaporation, and it creates a whole, hydro cycle. I don't know what the right word is. A whole water cycle up and down to the ocean that fuels the storm and keeps it moving. But if the water is not warm enough, it can't do that. The storm breaks up and just becomes kind of rain clouds. And so typically what England gets instead of tropical storms is rain. And look, Britain gets a lot of rain. But rain can kind of happen in any of these conditions, whereas tropical storms really need heat to keep the wind moving, to keep the whole thing going. So the reason I bring that up is because as the oceans are acidifying, as the oceans are warming, which is a key feature of anthropogenic climate change, human-caused climate change, is those storms are able to live farther away from where we're used to seeing them. Now, it's not like the waters down by Florida and the Caribbean are getting any cooler. They're not. So storms will continue to flow on that lateral trajectory from Africa to the Caribbean. However, now they don't necessarily have to go that way, right? Because the winds will naturally want to take the storm in the path that the winds go, which is from Africa to North America, to Europe, and back down to Africa again. That's the cycle that the Atlantic waters go in, north of the equator. South of the equator is the opposite. And this just has to do with the heat of the earth and a bunch of climatology that I don't really have a bunch of time to explain. But so essentially what's happening is because the waters on the United States eastern seaboard are warming, and they're warming farther out to sea, storms can actually hitch a ride on those waters and actually make it up to Europe without the storm actually breaking up. And this is what happened with Tropical Storm Eunice. And Tropical Storm Eunice, reports coming out of the UK show that actually there hasn't been a ton of damage to people. There's been a lot of damage to property. Thank goodness, right? We always want to make sure that people are safe. And it sounds like the only real damage has been to property. So that's truly a blessing. And I'm very happy that that's the case. However, England should be warned, because these types of storms are going to become more and more frequent as we hit more and more anthropogenic climate change. As the Earth continues to warm, we're going to be in this situation where the waters continue to warm, and thus more and more storms will have that kind of shortcut back into the Atlantic loop, and they will take these tropical storms up to Europe. And Europe will see more and more of these disastrous storms. Now, they're coming into England, right, because that's kind of where the ocean currents break as far as coming up and down. But it would not be surprising if we start to see tropical storms coming through northern France, Denmark, Germany, Even as now, I doubt it would get as far east as Poland, or even Hungary. But we can, as the world warms, we will start to see these storms bringing water to places that are not used to having them, and bringing these terrible storms to places that are not used to having them and not prepared to have them, right? And in any situation that starts to get weather that it's not prepared for, you have an increased chance that people die because they just don't have the ability to deal with it, right? Um, I live in the northern hemisphere, and in the northern part of the United States, and there's a joke that half an inch of snow will close everything in Atlanta, right? And it's a joke because up here we're used to snow, right? If we know it's going to snow, all the roads get salted, a bunch of precautions get taken, and then when the snow comes, it can be gotten rid of fairly easily and pushed aside and yada yada. It's not a big deal. But for areas that aren't used to it, it takes much less um, of that weather event to cause problems and damage. And the more extreme these get and the less able we are to respond to them, the more likely it is that people die. So we just have to be careful that as we enter the more dangerous portions of climate change, that we are prepared for the types of weather systems that we don't typically receive, because that is the best way for us to avoid losing people to these weather formations. Of course, we should be fighting climate change. We should be making sure that in every way possible we transition away from fossil fuels, we stop heating the planet, and all that stuff is important too. But we're past the point of prevention for climate change, right? So we're in the point of mitigation and adaptation. And humans are very good at adapting, for better or for worse, but we have to do it now, because we are starting to see weather patterns existing in places where they shouldn't, doing damage in places where they shouldn't. And these problems are going to continue to become worse. Storms are going to become more extreme. They'll appear in places they're not meant to be. And same thing with droughts, right? We'll start to see the climate changing in fundamental ways in the next couple decades. So it's important that we mitigate. It's important that we adapt. So yeah, I want to talk about this as a climate change story, and I hope that people smarter than me, people who are in more positions of power than me, and even just regular people start thinking about these issues that we're experiencing as part of the general climate change, and use that to push forward for the policies that we need to prevent, mitigate, and adapt.
Thanks for watching this video, guys. If you liked it, throw a like on it, share with your friends, and subscribe for more of our content. You can also find all of our videos and clips on youtube.com. Just search Let Them Eat Bread and you'll find all of our content. Alright guys, see you next time. Bye for now.